The World War. The moment humanity lost its innocence. The World War was a turning point in human history. Not just armies, but empires, societies, and ideologies collided in a massive storm. And that storm changed the world in a way it could never return from. But let's think for a moment. Do you really believe such a massive war started only because the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated? Of course not. The assassination was just the spark that pulled the trigger. Behind that trigger lay years of growing tension, an arms race, the struggle to divide colonies, the complex system of alliances formed by the great powers. Europe was already a barrel of gunpowder. The assassination merely lit the fuse. When the war began in 1914, most people thought it would last only a few months. Newspapers even wrote, "We'll be home by Christmas." But reality was far darker and far more destructive. The old understanding of warfare had ended, yet most commanders insisted on using outdated tactics. The result was a catastrophe unlike anything the world had ever seen. On the Western Front, trench warfare began. Hundreds of kilometers of parallel trenches filled with mud, lice, water, and rats. A soldier who survived the war said years later, "In the trenches, we had two enemies, the one in front of us and the mud. And we never knew which one was more dangerous." Soldiers sometimes couldn't take their feet out of the water for days. Ammunition was scarce, morale was low, and tension was high. After heavy bombardments, some soldiers were so shaken that there wasn't even a word to describe their state. Experts recorded it as shell shock. Artillery fire was the merciless face of the war. Hours, sometimes days of endless bombardment. An infantryman described it like this: "There were days when we couldn't tell the sky from the ground, only trembling earth and a never-ending roar." In 1915, chemical gases entered the battlefield. Mustard gas was so powerful that it could cling to a soldier's uniform and take effect hours later. Gas masks were not always enough. Many soldiers collapsed before they even understood what was happening. Death had become silent. Technology was rapidly evolving. Tanks were used for the first time. They were slow and often broke down, but they were a glimpse of the future of war. Planes, first used for reconnaissance, soon began bombing missions. The skies became part of the battlefield for the first time. The war wasn't only on the front lines, it was also in homes, villages, and cities. With most men at the front, women took on roles never seen before. They produced ammunition in factories, worked as nurses in hospitals, and kept society functioning. Women's entry into the workforce became one of the most lasting impacts of the war. The Eastern Front was an entirely different world. Freezing cold, vast distances, and chaotic logistics. Russia was collapsing. Economic crisis, food shortages, and unrest within the army erupted into revolution in 1917. The Tsarist regime fell, the Bolsheviks took power, and Russia withdrew from the war. This event shaped the politics of the entire century. The Ottoman Empire had to fight on multiple fronts at once. Freezing cold in the Caucasus, desert heat in Iraq, water scarcity in Sinai. But at Gallipoli, a legend was written. An Anzac soldier later said, "On that day, it wasn't about who won. It was about how they fought." Our respect for the Turkish soldier was endless. The final years of the war were a period of exhaustion. Europe's economies had collapsed, soldiers were drained, and civilians were worn out. The United States entered the war in 1917, completely shifting the balance. New troops, renewed morale, powerful industry. There was no turning back for Germany. In 1918, the armistice was signed. When the war ended, what remained were ruined cities, millions of deaths, and a broken world. Four great empires disappeared from history: the Ottoman Empire, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Russia. Europe's borders were redrawn, but peace did not bring peace. The harsh conditions imposed on Germany built up resentment over the years. That resentment grew, and eventually humanity was dragged into an even greater catastrophe: the Second World War. The First World War was not just a military conflict. It was a shift in eras, a rupture that changed technology, politics, societies, and even how people viewed the world. A soldier said years later, "When the war ended, we didn't return home. The ones who returned were the versions of us from before the war. We were no longer the same people. That is why the World War is the moment humanity lost its innocence." After that day, nothing was ever the same again. Unknown facts. In some trenches, soldiers stayed so long that small cultural communities began to form. One soldier described it like this: "The trench felt like our home, but at the same time it could become a grave ready to swallow us." The British Army initially didn't issue steel helmets, leading to huge losses from head injuries. Once helmets were introduced, head wounds decreased dramatically. Among nearly 16 million animals used in the war, pigeons played an unexpectedly crucial role. A single message from one pigeon saved an entire unit. Years later, a soldier said, "One bird kept a whole battalion alive." On Christmas of 1914, some fronts agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Soldiers met between the trenches. A German soldier recalled, "The people we called enemies that night were just like us, cold, shivering, and able to laugh." Hygiene in the trenches was so bad that in some areas, deaths from disease on quiet days exceeded deaths from combat on active days. After the war, some European countries suffered such a severe loss of male population that demographic gaps lasted for years. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the forgotten corners of history. For more hidden stories and surprising facts, don't forget to follow the channel. See you in the next history tale.